Hi everyone. Okay, so today is on omnipotence. This is going to be the first of a series of days devoted to the divine attributes. Omnipotence, omniscience, eternity, necessity. We've already looked at what it means to say that God is good via the problem of evil. That was an attribute paradox as well. There's questions about how these are supposed to relate to each other. So, for example, can God sin? Is a question about God's power. Can he do something? And his goodness that seems to limit his power in some way. If he's a perfect being, he can't sin, but he's all powerful, so he can do anything. So can he sin? Can God create a being whose mind he doesn't know? Is a conflict between power and knowledge? He can make anything, so of course he can make something he doesn't know, but he knows everything. So one question is about how these are supposed to relate to each other. Is eternity, can he cease to exist? His necessity, can he have an open future? But there are questions specifically about omnipotence that don't cross over into those other attributes that can help us figure out exactly what we mean by power. The classic one is the stone paradox. Can God create a stone so heavy that he can't lift it? That is the paradox of the stone. And it's really just about God's power versus his other power. It's an intra-power paradox. He's got two infinite powers. He can create anything, he can lift anything, so what happens when they butt heads? That's the paradox of the stone. Let me give you two quick answers. We're going to spend today using that paradox to get a little more precise about what we mean by all power, omnipotent. So, one answer from St. Thomas Aquinas, translated into, now, is that no, God can't create the stone, but he has all power anyway, because that is not a power. So we're going to look a little more carefully at that in a minute. We can call that the Thomistic answer. Thomistic meaning from Thomas, i.e. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century Dominican theologian. Answer 2. Compare these yourself. Answer 1. God was that Thomistic answer. God cannot create a stone that he can't lift. Maybe the stone makes no sense. But he has all power. That wasn't a power. Answer 2, we'll call this the Cartesian answer, is that yes, God can do anything. He can create a stone that he can't lift, and then he can lift the stone that he can't lift. And that's contradictory, but maybe God can do contradictory things. We call that the Cartesian answer from the 17th century French philosopher René Descartes, who seemed to think that God could change the laws of logic in the same way that he might create a larger mountain. Okay, let's go back to the first answer first, the Thomistic answer. So paradoxes are often a good excuse to be more precise about what we mean. So what do we mean by omnipotent? The quick, loose, sloppy answer is that omnipotence is all power, but that's vague. What does all mean? And what, for that matter, is a power? Not everything is a power. Knowledge is not necessarily a power. Justice is not a power. God has many qualities that are separate from his power. So what exactly is a power? Well, I think that what Aquinas is trying to get across in that passage, we'll talk a little more specifically about that passage in a second, but I think what he's trying to get across is something like the following. God creating is taking an idea, a mere idea, and making it real. So, there are no unicorns, but God can make a unicorn because we can imagine what that means. though there are none. And God could take that form that doesn't have anything in the actual world that corresponds to it and make matter take that form. So you start with an idea that may or may not exist, and God's power is his ability to make things embody those ideas. Okay, so what happens if some words don't name an idea? Say, can God make a square circle? No, he can't, Aquinas would say. God can't make a square circle, and that sounds like you've surrendered. It sounds like there's something God can't do. He can't make a square circle. The reason he can't make a square circle is not because he lacks power. It's because square circle doesn't name an idea. It's not one idea. You can't imagine it. It names two things that can't be one. You can't stop for a second and try to picture one. There's no picture. It cancels itself out. So, what does that have to do with God? Well, God is omnipotent. Omnipotence for Aquinas is the power to do all that is possible. So, what does possible mean? Well, it could mean many things. It could mean, for you and me, it means we can do it. It's possible for some subject. It's possible for me to write a word on my whiteboard. It's possible for you to stand up and turn around. Impossible can mean impossible for you. It's impossible for me to make a mountain, but not impossible for God. So we could just mean to say that God has all power is to say that he can do all that he can do, but that's circular. It doesn't tell us what he can do. To say that I can do all that I can do doesn't tell me what I can do. When we say that God has all power, we mean that he can do all that is possible in some larger way, not possible for some subject, but possible, period. So what is possible, period? Aquinas spends some time on this. If you go look at that reading, he works his way to it through several paragraphs. He starts with rambling about subjects and predicates. Some subjects can't include some predicates. A man can't be a donkey. Okay, well maybe God could make some man donkey. Why? Why can't that predicate be part of that subject? What he ultimately lands on and what he means to say is that there are some words we can use that cancel each other out, that in his phrase imply being and non-being. If I say square circle, that's different than larger mountain. A larger mountain doesn't contradict itself. It doesn't cancel itself out. It doesn't, its being would not imply its non-being. Where a circle, if it exists, has properties that cancel out the square. One thing can't be both. So if in describing something I cancel the description of it out, I'm contradicting myself. If I say, for example, can God sin? I'm really saying, for Aquinas, can God act in such a way such that he is no longer God? Can God, who is perfect, be imperfect? When I say it clearly, when I say, can a perfect being stop being perfect? Or can a perfect being not be perfect? I'm contradicting myself. I'm saying that one thing is and is not. That's what he means by being and non-being. So if in the description of an act, I take back what I'm asking God to do, I've contradicted myself. And so I haven't named an idea. I haven't named a power, and if I haven't named a power, I haven't actually asked God to do anything. So can God create a stone that he can't lift? Let's say that more carefully. Can God create a stone that God can't lift? Is asking, can God create a stone that an omnipotent being cannot lift? And that's a contradiction. It's a square circle. It's an unimaginable nothing. If you try to imagine a square circle, your mind will be blank. If you try to imagine a being that God can make that he cannot make, you're not imagining anything. And so you didn't say anything. And so that's why Aquinas thinks the solution to the stone paradox is to say the question is flawed. No, God can't create a stone that he can't lift, because a stone that God can't lift is not even an idea. Think back to that creation story I suggested a minute ago. God has every idea in front of his mind when he creates, and he chooses to make this and that and you and me and the sunset. But if something's not an idea, then it's not there in front of God waiting to be created. He can't choose it because there's nothing there to choose. It's not even possible. So, what is omnipotence? Omnipotence is the power to do all that is possible, and possible means logically possible. Logically possible means non-contradictory. So, can God create the stone? No. Or maybe we'd be better off saying there is no such thing as the stone. There could be no such thing as the stone. It's a nonsense sentence. That's one way you could respond to it. Story 2 is 3 centuries or so later, 4 centuries later, from René Descartes. Descartes thought it was sacrilegious to say that God was limited by the laws of logic. He could change them as easily as he could change the laws of nature. Now, those are not the same thing. It's one thing to make the speed of light faster. You can imagine it at a 0. It's another thing to make something that is and is not at the same time. That's the only law of logic that matters for our purposes here, is the law of non-contradiction. So for God to violate the laws of logic or change them is essentially to say God can make something that is and is not. And that's what Descartes thinks God can do. So omnipotence definition 2, the Cartesian definition from Descartes, is that God has the power to do all that is logically possible or impossible. He can do contradictory things. Okay, so what does that mean? Can he create a stone that he cannot lift? Yes. Can he lift the stone that he cannot lift? Yes to that too. So he can lift a thing that he cannot lift. And that's the solution to the paradox, is to say yes to everything. I want to think very carefully about what that means. What it means is that God can lift a stone that he cannot lift. Both of those are true for Descartes. And for Harry Frankfurt, if in your readings, Harry Frankfurt is the mouthpiece for this Cartesian point of view. God can lift, true, can lift the stone that he can't lift, also true. For a contradiction to be true, both the true and the not true need to be true. If that's confusing, that's the point. That's why Aquinas circumnavigated that terrain and got his answer. The Cartesian answer is that it is true that God can lift the stone that he can't lift. Now, I'll point out one little last thing. It's not a small thing about this. If it's true that God can lift the stone that he can't lift, then he can't lift it. And there's something God can't do. So, what I want you to do for your homework is to tell me which answer makes more sense to you. That God can't lift the stone, but has all power anyway, or that God can create a stone that he can't lift and then he can lift it. Good luck.